Hi, and welcome to this episode of In Search of Courage and Meaning. I'm Abby Keene of Abby Keene Healing. I'm a healer coach, and as I always say, mainly a human being in search of courage and meaning in my own life. And on this journey, I get to talk with wonderful people about deep subject in the hopes that we can inspire others to dig deeper and live more fully. And so I have with me Lorie Dechar. Thank you so much for showing up.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Abby. And as I said, it's always wonderful to have an opportunity to have a conversation with you. So this is just another good opportunity. And I want to thank you for stepping up to this conversation and actually staying with it, being part of the emergence of this kind of conversation, particularly for, I think, the emergent feminine on the planet now. I mean, not, that being not just in women, but in men, but this idea of that we need to bring in a different attitude, a different approach to our current reality. And I feel like that's one of the things that you and I've talked about. And I'm really, really grateful to you for actually being part of that conversation.
Thank you. And I just love that you're saying that, because for me, that is such a big passion of mine, to help other women come out of their own hiding and step up, show up in their life, following their bliss, following their passions, whatever that looks like. And I feel like, I'm stepping up here with you in this.
I get that totally. And that's what we do, one voice at a time.
Yeah.
As this new sort of vocabulary, I think, is emerging. And you and I were talking about this idea of how do we listen to the body?
Right. And before we step into that topic, which is another passion of yours, of mine, I would like you to introduce yourself.
Oh, right. That, yes. Okay. So it's taken me, I'm actually been in practice as an acupuncturist for 40 years, a practitioner of Chinese medicine with a particular orientation to the emotional life. And along the lines of my work, I realized that I wanted to have other tools. So I have about 25 years of study of Western psychology, particularly Jungian depth psychology, and somatic practices, body-based psychotherapies, including Gestalt and a modality called focusing. And I've, in the course of that, ended up writing 3 books. My first book, 5 Spirits, is about Taoist psychology, basically, the indigenous psychology of China. And then a book that I wrote with my husband and alchemical partner, Benjamin Fox, The Alchemy of Inner Work. And my 3rd book, Kigo, which is about the spiritual nature of acupuncture points. So all of these books are looking at the psyche and how we actually transform as human beings through the soul level. I guess I say, in addition to that, is I'm a very grateful mother and grandmother of a 3-year-old who is now becoming one of my great life teachers. I've had a lot of important teachers, but my granddaughter is probably on the list now. So that gives you an overview.
Exactly. And so no wonder we're kind of zeroing in a little bit on the body and the body's role in the healing journey. And I would venture to also add in on the spiritual path as well. And so I'm very curious, and I know that's a huge topic, but we have to start somewhere. In your experience and in your work, can you talk a little bit about the role of the body, aches, pains, illnesses, and
Mhm.
all the treasures that it has for us.
Right. Headaches, hot flashes, and hemorrhoids.
Yes, yes.
All the great gifts of the body, right? Well, as a practitioner of Chinese medicine, my original training, I mean, the core sort of premise of Chinese medicine that's different, you could say, from Western medicine, is that it is inherently a body, mind, spirit modality.
Mhm.
It recognizes that the life force vibrates at these different, you could say, frequencies. And they call that qi, the qi.
Mhm.
Most people have heard that word by now. So the qi is basically the force of life,
Yeah.
the however it manifests throughout the cosmos. And it manifests in different vibratory levels, some more dense, what they would say yin material, and some much more elusive or ephemeral, and they would say call that yang, or we would say matter, all the way through a spectrum to spirit. And when you train as an acupuncturist, you should be trained. Not all programs do, but the idea is that we can touch all those levels,
Mm-hmm.
and that healing happens on all those levels. And certainly, I think one of the reasons that Chinese medicine was so quickly adapted in the West was because there was a movement in the early 70s recognizing this connection between body, mind, and spirit. You know, it's been one of the sort of, you could say, new age revolutions, but we're still really working to understand what that means.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, I came into this medicine, this way of working in the 70s, moving from radical feminist activism into healing, because it was just like I knew if I was going to make it through the decades, I was going to have to find a different way to create change than demonstrating and banging my head against walls. So that I have no regrets on that. But the point is, this revolution of Cartesian dualistic thinking into something more integral is only at its beginning. You know, we're just at the tip of the iceberg of what that actually means in terms of consciousness. Yeah. So for me, along the way there, somewhere probably in my 15th year of practice, it got clear to me that the area that I was passionate about and my greatest skill sets are in the interface of matter and spirit, which I call the soul domain, or the domain of the psyche. And so I, engaged in a very long study of how to work at that level, both from a Taoist perspective, a Chinese perspective, a Western depth psychology perspective, and then looking into the art and technology of alchemy as it shows up in Europe, India, and China. That's the core of my work. How do we use these tools to touch people at the level where I believe real change happens?
Yeah, and I was just thinking of asking you, like, I guess, do you feel that real healing has to be on that level of the soul?
Well, it depends what we call real healing, Abby. But I think and I'll joke about this a lot. It's like if a kid, a 17-year-old kid, comes into my acupuncture office, I don't treat physical issues anymore. But for much of the time that I was working, I did. At this point, my work is mostly psychological and teaching and these other levels. But I mean, if a kid comes in, a 17-year-old kid with an acute sprain and just needs a treatment, which I've done many of, and you treat, you do some heat and some liniments, and the next week they're back on the soccer field. They don't need deep psychological healing,
Right. I
But,
guess I'm thinking about like my women, and I know you also work with women a lot with women who are at a certain point in their life. But I'm wondering, so if my focus is women who tend to be in middle life, kind of waking up to, oh, I'm
yeah,
like halfway there, if not more.
yeah,
This was how I lived, and now I need to live differently. I need to be more true to myself,
yeah,
and this burning yearning to express myself fully as a human being in this lifetime that I've received, before it's too late. And
yes,
so I'm wondering, for these people who are standing in front of like this need for change, where does the body fit in? Because I have noticed, and I'll throw that your way and then shut up,
yeah,
that if you don't follow your callings, the body starts to tell you about it via more illnesses, more aches and pains, more friction within in that respect. So I'm wondering what you think of that.
well, again, turning to Chinese medicine, because that is a wisdom tradition that has informs a lot of how I look at these things. The core premise is that all dis-ease is actually a signpost guiding us back to what they say our Tao, our mandate. What are we here for? So
Yeah.
ultimately, every one of those aches and pains, every one of the depressions or hormonal fluctuations or back pain, every one of those symptoms potentially, and
Hmm.
this is very hard. It's a hard, as you sometimes say, it's a hard one to digest. It's a hard one to chew, right? But this is the core of what I call alchemical work, of alchemical being the art of transformation.
Yeah.
When we're talking about healing, as you say, real healing, not just like getting back to my old self again,
Mm,
like this 17-year-old kid. It's like, no, he's going to get back to a 17-year-old kid and do what he needs to do. He's
right.
not at that kind of a point where he needs to go in and really look at in the way that we do at midlife, which is a pivotal moment spiritually.
Yeah.
And at that point, to begin to cherish these places where we feel stuck or we're feeling pain, that's an alchemical attitude. It's what we call cherishing the lead so that we can transform it into gold. That's the
Yeah.
essence of alchemy. When they were talking about, turning lead into gold, they weren't really focused on a chunk of outer lead. They're focused on these places inside
Yeah.
where I get stopped, where my resistances are. And it is a whole reversal in our Western dominated, goal oriented, feel better, feel younger, feel more potent way of being, to say, oh,
Yeah.
wait a minute, why am I waking up in the morning with this feeling of emptiness?
Yeah.
Why do I keep dreaming that I'm, trying to climb up an endless hill, or
Yeah.
I'm driving a car on the edge of a ravine, or,
Yeah.
why do I keep getting these shoulder and neck pains, like I have a weight. So to begin to say these matter, they shouldn't just be, sometimes sometimes we medicate or sometimes we use alleviation methods, but we have to pay attention.
Yeah. I so relate to what you're saying. For me, this is like the gold. And I so agree that it takes like this whole mind shift, because everything in me wants to sweep under the carpet and
Everything.
go back to feeling good, feeling good. and not like to see the gift in the situation and that there's something being communicated. The friction something in friction, which means there's this side and there's that side.
And so,
And
and there's this side and that side. It means something new is trying to come up in between
yeah,
those two. The friction is as you say, it's something trying to emerge.
yeah. And how do we sit with pain?
It's really, really, really hard. I mean, honestly, like I joke about this, but I'll say I created all the teaching and all of the mentoring and then the platform that we've created for these conversations. And like I said, I'm so grateful to you because I feel like one of the ways we do this is through community, is through
Mm,
creating a culture that actually can support this kind of what I call inner work, the alchemy of inner work. That's the name of our
yeah,
book, in Chinese, it's Neidan. It's, working on the inner treasure,
yeah,
the
yeah.
inner Dan is cinnabar. It's the materials from which the precious is formed. But
Hmm.
you have, in alchemy, these precious materials are formed in a furnace. They're formed in a closed vessel that's heated and worked with and pounded and spread out and distilled. I mean, this is all the work that these transformational processes take. And, our culture doesn't particularly value that.
Right. And another thing that occurred to me when you were speaking about community is that we need help.
Yes.
And we so often, especially I notice with mothers and people, the type that takes everything on her own shoulders, and I can do it and I can do it alone. Asking and receiving help is so difficult. It's almost the thought that there's a weakness in me that I need help. Um, and so what you're proposing with having the right kind of community to support that process is that it's okay to allow help and to be supported by others.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I always say is transformation is a group process. None of us can do it alone. None of
Yeah.
us. I mean, maybe if you're a hermit or a sage, in a cave on a mountaintop in the Wuling Mountains of northern China, maybe
Mm,
there are mystics who've done this work alone, but really, for most of us, to do it alone is futile,
yeah.
because the outer culture is so powerful in its pressure.
Yeah.
It's a strong pressure to perform, to be heroic, to be not invulnerable.
Yeah.
And none of those qualities support this kind of deep inner process. So I do think community is one thing. And then the other is developing skills and tools that support this kind of work.
Hmm.
Practices, finding healers or practitioners who've done it, who are engaged in that level of work, who can actually support a process.
Yeah.
And a lot of those tools are what Benjamin and I got into the book, The Alchemy of Inner Work. They're tools that anyone can do and use. But they are better, more potent when used in community.
Yes. Yes. So true. And I want to add the word that you used before we started recording, and that was divinity
Yeah,
to the
right.
conversation. And so, with
Mm.
everything that we just mentioned, how do you include this word into these this process, this path, this, I don't even know what words to use to ask this question. So I'm throwing the word divinity your way.
Well, it's kind of perfect timing because we said, how do we do this? I mean, I will say for me, that midlife passage was hell. It really was. It was like a trip to hell. I mean, I remember when I had my first hormone-induced panic attack, and I was in my mid-40s, and I literally didn't know what hit me. I can remember the moment. It was like, what is going on? It was just because I didn't get hot flashes. I got panic attacks.
Wow.
Yeah. But the point is, there is a way that any of these processes begin with that kind of a confront, because something's going to happen, a death, a divorce, a acute or chronic physical pain. Menopause alone will do it to you, but if we say, okay, what's the inner, I've got to get bigger than just like, I'm a victim of this body that's betraying me.
Yeah.
Emotional, imbalance that's betraying me. So that was really when, I mean, my first book was published soon after that, but it was a transformational time for me. So I can go back there and say, okay, what helps? And definitely, like you said, reaching out, finding guides, finding healers who can support you, developing practices, that you work with over time, simple practices. But the third thing, when I say you can't do it alone, the other piece is that we can't do it alone without some kind of backup spiritual support. I don't think it's possible, and I don't think we're supposed to. And everyone, of course, has to find that in their own way. How do we find our way to some kind of larger than me guidance?
Yeah.
And I don't think that, for many of us, the old structures, the old given structures of religion, while they may be comforting, they're not adequate. So I think one thing I would say here, as far as that goes, is what supported me was coming to understand two things. One is that there is a larger organizing principle than the ego.
Yeah.
Whatever we call that. I mean, you can call it your higher power. You can call it, in depth psychology, we call it the big self, an organizing principle that is connected to my divine mandate and knows more than I do.
Yeah.
Comes to me through my dreams and through coincidences. And I'm going to get back to how another way we know that it's activated, or in Chinese medicine, we say every person has their Tao, their way. These are ways of expressing that spiritual, implicit spiritual spark or mandate that every living thing has.
Right. And I find with people, often it's buried, in layers and layers of other, and it's harder to access. Whereas for some who practice, it's kind of, it's right there. It's not so far away or so hidden.
Or it's, I would say at this stage in my life, and I've been at this a long time, I lose it. But I do have tools. Well, first of all, to recognize I've lost it. Like recognize that I'm not in the groove that feels like the self.
Yeah.
I'm in some other groove and it's like bumpy and nauseating and insane, and I'm acting like
Yeah.
a lunatic or any of those different signs. Or I'm focused on the future, or I'm jealous, I'm envious, I'm feeling
Yeah.
like, all those things. When I'm in that groove of the Tao, it's not that everything's easy or perfect by any means, but somehow I'm in my integrity there and I can
Mm-hmm.
find my way. So I said, we find this. I do a lot of dream work. That's one tool. Benjamin, my husband's an astrologer, the birth chart and transits, that's another tool. There are ways that we can do it through meditation, but I think what you and I want to hone in on here today is another way to get to this is through the body.
Yeah.
Learning how to listen and trust and honor the body as a source of really divine information. It is a doorway to the Tao.
Right.
And that, as we're saying, is a radical shift in attitude.
Right. And I think it was before we started recording. So I want you to repeat something that you said before about how it's like counterintuitive because we want to reach to the heavens and we want to spread out and
Yes.
like sensing my body can get me somewhere like boring or confined or can you say
Yeah.
more about that?
Yes. So what you just described is kind of the linchpin of all what we call inner alchemical work, because the catchphrase from ancient Taoist texts is, when we turn the light around, everything in the world is also turned around. That's a quote from a text called The Secret of the Golden Flower. When we turn the light around, everything in the world is also turned around. So
What do you mean by around as opposed to on?
yeah, so it took me a lot. I read these texts for many years. I would like, what are they talking about? And, through etymology and other phrases and other texts, what I've come to understand is the light of awareness.
Mm-hmm.
The light is that light, that gift that we have as humans for awareness. But that its natural tendency is what you said, to go out and say, okay, what's this one happening? Is Joe Biden going to run again? What's happening with the red states? What's happening with my kids? What's happening with my aging parents? Out. What do they have that I don't have? There's so much outwardness of awareness. That's its nature. It's young and it's expansive. Alchemy begins when we intentionally reverse that awareness and begin to bring it to our inner state, that inner place where we can begin to care about and attend to what's happening at the level of my own body, mind, spirit.
Yep.
To care about that and to really see it as a source of wisdom. And that's different from just being self-absorbed. It's not losing myself in it. It's actively engaging in a relational process with, our frontal lobes, our awareness, and our autonomic nervous system. Like, what's happening with my hormone? What is the invitation here? And what, I think the premise of this is that shift in awareness, that shift in treasuring and caring about the inner world actually allows us to create a different outer reality.
Yes, yes, yes. I often think about it as like when you jump, you have to go down to go up. You have to bend your knees and crouch so that you can jump, right? And I always feel like in order to go out in this new kind of way, we have to go in
That's
so that we
correct.
can come out
That's
with our
correct.
truth.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, because any transformation, any real, so when we get back to that statement, real healing in the sense of real fundamental reorganizing, whether it's getting married, having a kid, having our kids leave for college, accepting that I'm not going to have kids, in this lifetime. And then at my stage of life saying, okay, I've got I don't know how much longer I have to do the work that I'm passionate about, but it is time limited, like beginning to confront those realities and pare away what's extraneous so that I can make my contribution. All of these changes require this kind of descent, what I call a descent to the interior. And
Yeah.
really listening deeply to those messages that are coming up from the body.
Yeah.
And I think, well, my sort of current focus in my work is to really restore the awareness of the body as we said earlier, as a source of the divine, that there's actually illumination, not just up there and out there in heaven, but down here in this material domain. And that is where, our souls come into embodiment to actually experience the world as it is in form, and through to begin to really cherish and honor the divinity of the material world, including our bodies.
Right, right. And it's big and small because it's looking at our diseases as, or even menopause, which is not a disease, or as an invitation, but also that the body is available here and now all the time, as long as we are still alive in this material world. And
Yes,
even as you and I converse here, I can be in touch with something that is physical, and how that changes how I am right now in this moment. If I
absolutely.
keep a sensation going, if I'm aware of my breath,
Yes.
I'm more fully here with you.
Yes, I love that, Abby. Exactly. And, for me, it's like, okay, as I lean back and trust that whatever needs to emerge from our dialogue will emerge, and that we can just cherish this sort of space that constellates as we both stay within our bodies, listening to that, as you say, the breathing. Where's my back now? Where, how do I feel my feet on the earth? Is there something emergent that needs to be spoken now?
Yeah.
And yes, again, and the quality of the field between us is imbued with that awareness.
Yeah. Yeah. And then it feels about the experience, like life is an experience, as opposed to, I'm not saying it correctly, but there was a feeling that we can submit to the experience and the unfolding, rather than the part that wants to be in control and run forward and plan and, make it look good, but rather, as you said, lean back and let life unfold.
Yes. Yes. And all of that is, you know, it's easier said than done. I think I know that you have practices that you're dedicated to, as I do. And I think without those practices, I mean, I've said this, I don't think I could have done the work I've done,
Yeah.
to work with so many people over such a long time, in processes, in transformation, going through things. I think to really listen in the way that we're talking about listening to what's emergent, we need to have tools and practices, communities of support, space
Mm.
to do these things. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted to go back kind of to the beginning, a full circle-ish,
Uh-huh.
and talk again about the woman kind of standing in her midlife, longing for some change, maybe feeling confused or lost, or I can do it on my own, but stuck. And in a way, is there anything you would want her to know from your vantage point now?
Mm. Well, what I would want her to know is that the earth needs her to find herself and to find her voice. Like the earth, the time needs this feminine knowing, and not just in secret, but to emerge as a vocabulary and a culture, and to really begin to inform the values of the world that we live in. You know, the values, and I'm going to say this even though it's risky in terms of gender politics, but the values of estrogen and the values of the wisdom of birth and menopause and grandmotherhood.
Mm-hmm.
You know, these are really different values than the values of the patriarchy. And the patriarchy has had its run. I mean, it's had a good run, mental, rational, you know, top down power. It's like the ego. They've had a great run. And it's had, you know, but it's run its course. So what I would say to that woman, who is me and you and any woman listening, and the feminine in men, the feminine emergent in the masculine, is that the earth needs us to do this work. It's not just for the self alone.
Right.
So we do this.
Right. And we're in crises.
We're in crises. It's crucial. Yeah. And it's crucial that we have these conversations, that we don't just do it alone. Mm. What's going to actually facilitate or cultivate the change isn't going to be one person. It's not going to be one famous person. It's a rhizomatic web of interconnections, and it's happening. You know, in women and men, a shift towards the yin, towards the earth, towards seeing the divine as immanent, not just a top-down God who tells us what to do, but an implicit in us divinity that is guidance.
Yeah. I feel like this is such a great place to stop, because it feels like an arrival at this invitation to
yes, and you know, to really, the work that you're offering, the work that we're offering, that there are, I mean, really communities of transformational healing and webs and interconnections, and that this is, I think, for me anyway, this is the emergent possibility for us as
and
humans.
Even just noticing that I'm feeling quieter, more inspired, my heart feels, you know, fuller, gentler. So that is just a result of us having this conversation. What if we all had these conversations and got this opportunity to feel and to open up more and to, you know, allow more of us out?
And aren't we so blessed to have, you know, this is like a space that you and I we come together and then boom, we slip into. And of course, that's who we are, but it's also what we dedicate ourselves to in our lifetime, and
Yeah.
bringing that to others.
Yeah.
Well, as I said at the beginning, Abby, thank you so much for doing what you do and for being in my life and in my community, and to be continued.
Yeah, same here. And thank you so much for showing up here with me. And if anybody out there who wants to learn more about Lorie's work and Lorie and Benjamin's beautiful community called A New Possibility, I will put a link to
Great.
anything relevant. And of course, also a link to my own work. And thank you.
Yeah, thank you.